And welcome to the Prime Divide. These are your hosts, the Red Dwarf.
And the Blue Mantis.
And Shadow.
And today we're here to talk to you about what is going on in the Ukraine and specifically Crimea.
Now, first of all, is it pronounced Crimea or Crimea or
Crimea was how I heard it pronounced on the news today.
Crimea?
Yeah.
And of course, the conversation is largely about Russia as well.
Yes.
And also the European Union and America are big players in what's going on right now, or at least seem to be.
Yeah.
So I think you have a better grasp on this than any of us, so you want to try and give some kind of a synopsis to start us off?
Alright, so we'll say that Crimea is a little peninsula on the northern part of the Black Sea. It's currently possessed as part of Ukraine, and basically what has happened is kind of, a lot of people are referring to it kind of the largest geopolitical thing that has happened in a long time because it involved the two major powers of the world. Basically, Russia has moved troops into Crimea and taken kind of de facto possession of it. And basically what they did is use the Ukrainian revolution as both an excuse and a reason to be doing this, because Russia has their only Black Sea military navy base in this province or area, or whatever you want to call it.
So it's worth noting that Crimea in the past was actually a part of Russia at one time, and a large number of the people in Crimea are Russian-speaking or ethnic Russians or identify as Russian.
Yeah, so the number specifically is 58% identify as Russian, 24% identify as Ukrainian, and 12% identify as Crimean. I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Tatar. We're probably going to butcher a lot of words here.
Tatars, yeah, I think.
Tatar, yeah. And these are a predominantly Muslim group who were kicked out of Crimea by Stalin back in 1944 because he accused them of basically siding and sympathizing with the Nazis, because the Nazis possessed Crimea during World War II.
And those Muslims called the Tatars are back now?
And they started coming back pretty much once the USSR fell. It was a pretty bad Buddha when Stalin kicked them out. About half of them died. So quite a few people died. So they, of course, have there's a little bit of a grudge there.
And also the Ukrainians as a whole were victims of the Holodomor or whatever, which was the Russian genocide through starvation. Is that correct? They intentionally starved millions of Ukrainian people, and that was the Soviet Union at the time.
It's worth mentioning the starvation wasn't specifically Ukrainian. The Ukrainians took the brunt of it by far, but they actually also starved out some Russian provinces too. It was mostly, apparently, the goal was to starve out rich farmers, basically, who were kind of considered petty bourgeoisie. So during the Communist Revolution, they considered these guys capitalists. So they kind of just starved out big chunks of the area to move the wheat and basically the resources closer to the center of kind of the communist strongholds.
So there's some history, and there's probably still some resentment of the Russians because those crimes were committed by the former Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider in terms of the...
Yeah, basically what happened is Ukraine kind of joined in, got taken into the USSR once they were created. But then it was actually 1954, Crimea, because there were different federations within the USSR. Like the Russians had a Russian Soviet Socialist Republic, Ukraine had a Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and Crimea was possessed by the Russian one. Until 1954, when a drunken Nikita Khrushchev basically gave it to the Ukrainian one. He was actually Ukrainian himself.
Well, he was drunk?
Apparently, the people just talk about him being a major drunk all the time. It sounded like a lot of his ideas were under the influence of...
Well, so is Winston Churchill.
Yeah, for sure. Nothing wrong with that.
Now, another part of this story is that the Ukraine used to be a nuclear power. They used to have nuclear weapons, and they deactivated or disarmed all their nuclear weapons, in part based on the promise that the Russians would never invade them and would respect their territorial boundaries, and basically because they believed that they would honor those agreements, they disarmed their nuclear weapons. And if they still had those nuclear weapons, it's unlikely that Russia would have invaded Crimea in the way that it has.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So part of it is that it sets a really bad message about nuclear disarmament, because it basically shows that if you have nukes, you better keep them, and if you don't have them, you better get them, because a country like Russia will invade you if you don't have nukes.
Certainly, yeah. It's the North Korean theory right there, is you can be a crazy country like North Korea, unstable, threaten the world, like enslave your own population, but if you got some nukes, you're probably untouchable to the outside world. And it was called the Budapest Memorandum, Budapest
That's
something.
right. Memorandum, yeah.
Memorandum. When they disarmed voluntarily under the implication that Russia would not invade them militarily or even economically.
And just to be clear, I mean, basically what we're witnessing, most people would call an invasion and an occupation, because they moved in troops, they moved in tanks, they moved in armed soldiers across the national border of a sovereign country and occupied it and surrounded their military bases, like their surrounding bases with soldiers, and like slowly taking them over. I think mostly without any shots been fired, or maybe entirely without any shots being fired, but they're like going to military bases that have like a Ukrainian flag, occupying it and like taking down the Ukrainian flag and like running up a different flag. So they're basically occupying the country and invading the country.
I mean, this is kind of an interesting part. Like, Crimea was one of a few other provinces that were given to Ukraine by drunken Khrushchev. It's sort of like a symbolic gift to them, partially so that the Russians, like in Moscow, wouldn't have to deal with it. You let them like govern themselves well being in control of them. But and it was also sort of just to appease the nationalists of the country, because the Ukrainian nationalists who kind of didn't like being part of like the Russian-controlled USSR, it was sort of just like a goodwill gesture. Here's like a beautiful, like kind of historically important piece. But it's also worth noting that Russia is actually allowed to have 24,000 troops in their Crimean base. They pay $90 million a year for permission, because in '92, when the USSR broke up, there was the fleet, the Soviet Union fleet in the Black Sea. And since they had their fleet there, the Ukrainians were like, well, this is ours. This is, like, the land given to us is now part of us, because Crimea was stuck with the Ukraine. It was part of them when the USSR broke apart. But so they decided in '92 to split the fleet in half. So Russia would get half, Ukraine would get half, and they'd both have a fleet that would operate out of this Black Sea.
Of like battleships, you mean?
Yeah, they're
Military vessels?
military capabilities and boats, and yeah. And interestingly enough, now that Russia moved in, a lot of the Crimean Navy, since they were kind of traditionally part of the Russian Navy, immediately defected back to Russia. Like voluntarily, some of them quite energetically.
It's treason, I call that.
You'd call that treason for sure, but like a lot of what people are saying is like, why did Crimea be given to Ukraine? It was historically Russian for between the 18th and 20th century, so a good 200 years of straight Russian rule.
When I've heard that Russian militants or militias are arming and putting on uniforms and joining the Russian soldiers, basically, so that the local residents of Crimea, some of them are putting on uniforms, picking up guns, and basically just like joining up with the Russians.
You gotta think 60% of the population, that's a lot of Russian sympathizers, right? It's more than the majority.
Yeah. So it's a little different than, for example, the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan, where they just like obviously resent it and hate it, and you know they have no business being there whatsoever. Whereas in this case, you could argue they do have some business being there, and not everybody hates it. Some people there hate it. Yeah, maybe there's more than half who are okay with it. And the thing also is, not all of the Russians want Russia to be invading. They may want to be part of Russia, they may sympathize with Russia, but that doesn't mean that all of them are okay with the fact that Russia's just like violated international law and like used military force instead of like, because look at Canada and Quebec, right? If Quebec wants to separate, they don't like bring in another nation's military. It's like a referee. Yeah, it's like France, like getting France to come and support Quebec in like a military takeover of Quebec. Like, not exactly at all.
Charles de Gaulle, the French like president of France, or like the second half of World War II, got in a lot of trouble actually for coming and like rallying the Quebec people and saying they should like separate aggressively. It's like, you can't do that.
Well, and that's the point. Is like the real question isn't who should Crimea belong belong to or who is more ethnically dominant there. The real question is, why is this being done with the military instead of through some kind of legal process, some kind of voting
And
process?
that's when this thing gets interesting, right? Because Russia would not have done this before the revolution, right? So, like, they've kicked out Viktor Yanukovych now, the corrupt president of
I heard
Ukraine.
something about he like defected and like left the country voluntarily.
He ran.
Abdicated his like post and then came back and was like, I changed my mind, I want my job back, which is weird.
I didn't hear that part. I heard that he fled because like they were literally, like, the revolution literally would have killed him. Like, they were attempting to kill him because they think he stole between 2010 and 2013 between 8 and 12 billion dollars, and the Ukraine is really screwed for cash. Their new president has said
the president of Ukraine
he
personally stole that much money,
and him and his cronies, and he's like become fabulously rich in his personal wealth that they've counted. Like, he was a Russian puppet who did what Russia wanted and robbed the country blind. So, like, I totally sympathize with the people for aggressively booting him out. Like, it would have been sweet.
You said he was
You
said he was a Russian puppet.
Yes, that's something that basically the world has agreed on, is that Viktor Yanukovych was a Russian puppet.
He has a fleet of cars and a zoo.
Fleet of cars and a zoo?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would like to have a zoo. I mean, not a zoo, but a conservation area. But anyways.
Robbed Ukrainians.
So Vladimir Putin is now making these moves, which people are considering to be pretty bold, because basically they are saying, like, the U.S., Obama is saying that this is a violation of international law, maybe multiple international laws.
People are saying that.
And so it really ratchets up the tensions between the two nuclear superpowers, or two of the nuclear superpowers, in a way that, it has to be said, they're saying we haven't seen this kind of thing since the Cold War, and some people are suggesting that maybe this is a new kind of Cold War, because the previous thing in Syria was also like about Russian proxies, basically, like the whole thing in Syria, right, had something to do with like Syria. Russia had interests in Syria, and America had conflicting interests. So there was sort of this, like, contest of wills or whatever, a political brinksmanship between Obama and Putin over Syria, where Obama was saying he was going to fire cruise missiles, or he was going to invade, and at the end he backed down and like didn't do anything.
No, I'll give you Putin's perspective as it's kind of been unfolding. Since 9/11, there was a little bit of attempt to rebuild relations between Russia and the U.S. Actually, Russia let them build U.S. military bases pretty deep into them while they were attacking Afghanistan. But basically, once the U.S. started attacking Iraq, Russia said they couldn't go along with that. The U.S. was basically just nakedly grabbing like wealth from another country in an imperialist fashion. So relations fell apart. And since then, there has been Russia's main complaint is that the United States has been boxing Russia in by inviting other groups into NATO. So they've been letting in Georgia, Lithuania, Latvia, all of these former USSR states.
But not Russia themselves.
But not Russia themselves. And Russia at a point was trying to get in. But for some reason, I don't know if it fell apart because of some pride thing. Russia wanted to be asked, and the NATO, it might have literally been something.
Well, I thought the whole point of NATO was sort of to exclude Russia.
That was originally
keep them in check or whatever.
But the fact is, like, Russia, after the fall of the USSR, haven't been an imperialist. They're just another capitalist nation amongst capitalist nations. Like, the ideological battle is over. They're just a corrupt.
Right.
They're very powerful.
And they said initially, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia went through a period where they were completely corrupt and screwed up and basically run by the mob.
Totally robbed by oligarchic
totally
criminals.
Screwed up, yeah, like organized crime. And the way that Russia was treated and the thing about NATO was all based on the assumption that they would like stay that way. It was never assumed that they would recover to the kind of like power that they now have.
Yeah.
And then also, what I've heard about the significance of this is that basically this event of Putin invading Crimea really exposes NATO, because he basically called their bluff. And now, because NATO is powerless to respond to this event, it basically like very strongly delegitimizes NATO and makes it clear that they basically like don't have power necessarily, or can't keep the promises that they've made. Because I think that same Budapest memorandum, it actually legally compels NATO to respond to what's happening.
Section 5 of the NATO thing is the one brought up, but Ukraine wasn't part of NATO.
Right.
They were trying to get them in.
But if it had been a different country,
like Latvia now, there's like Lithuania, if those countries with like their very small populations, like most Americans wouldn't know who they are or care about them, but the U.S. is required to go to war with any country that invades.
Right, and would they do that if it was Russia?
Yes.
Because that would mean World War III, or that would mean a nuclear war. And so is it worth going into a nuclear war to protect a small little region like Crimea?
And that's the thing,
or
especially
Latvia?
when Crimea goes over without a shot fired, and most of them immediately like, oh look, here's the Russians, let's side with the Russians. Like, well, can you really? It's like we gotta save those people, man. They're so desperate to go to Russia that we gotta kill them all or something.
Well, and as Shadow pointed out, I mean, it has to be said, just the hypocrisy of a country like the States making any kind of a fuss about this, when what's going on here? They're invading a country with their military. Well, you do that consistently all over the world.
And you have a lot less relation with those
countries you have no business and no right in whatsoever, like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. It's just like they just invade anybody they want, occupy anybody they want, for any reason they want. That always turn out to be false reasons and like false pretenses.
Yeah.
With massive costs and lives. So like, what does it matter if Russia does something like invade Crimea by comparison to the Afghan war or the Iraq war?
Did you catch John Kerry's quotes? He's like, people are just laughing about it for days. He's like, this is the 21st century, not the 19th. You can't just go invading other countries on trumped up charges. And it's like, man, like you can't.
The worst hypocrites in the world.
It hasn't even been like 10 years. Like the war is still going on.
Yeah. So it's surprising that only America has been allowed to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That, what you realize is like, wait a minute, I guess now that you think about it, China and Russia aren't doing that all the time. You just kind of assume that any like big power would be, but I guess the way the world really is that America is the one country in the world that gets to just like invade other countries and like break international laws whenever they want.
Yeah. And
with total impunity, just total, like...
And the reason it sort of be is because they won the war. They won World War II, and then they won the Cold War.
They didn't win it alone.
Well, no, obviously they didn't win it alone.
They bankrolled it like significantly and came out completely unscathed.
Yeah, but most important though was they won, is that they were the strongest at the end of each war.
Yeah.
It's like no matter what. So it's like, but they're realizing now when you both have like a nuclear Armageddon capable stockpile of weapons. Like what? It's like, oh look, we have more tanks and jets than you. Like, we still got enough to wipe you out. Like, oh well, what if we spend way more? We still got enough to wipe you out. It's like, all right, well maybe we can't like beat you financially here.
Well, in theory, Russia can do anything it wants, because nobody will like. That's what Dan Carlin was saying.
Yeah.
Like unless they do something so egregious that it's worth starting a nuclear war with them, then you pretty much have to let them do whatever they want. And the same goes for any like army or any nation that has a massive military stockpile of nuclear weapons, like more than a few. If they want to invade someone and they can pull that off, you can't really stop them unless you're willing to risk getting nuked.
No, and it's worth remembering like sort of why they moved into Crimea, and the reason specifically, like they wouldn't have just done this for any country. They did this because this is their only Black Sea base, which is a hugely strategic, valuable part. And the other part is, well, they've been moving in, like getting all these boxed in NATO countries around them, Lithuania, Latvia, Georgia. They've been moving missile bases surrounding Russia because their goal, as they've actually mentioned, is
Who has been doing that?
This is the United States.
Right.
This is sort of why they were inviting them into NATO, so that they could build Czechoslovakia even, like, they've been building missile shields because what they're hoping is that they could literally box in Russia's nuclear arsenal to the point where the United States could nuke Russia, but Russia's nukes would be shot down leaving Russia. Which means they're trying to turn mutually assured destruction, which keeps the world stable because nobody wants that. They're trying to turn that into Russian assured destruction, which is a lot less stable because suddenly one country is going to go for hegemon. It's like, we're going to take this thing, Russia can't stop us.
Yeah, which could cause a desperate last-ditch attempt to fire nukes or whatever. Well, I mean, mutually assured destruction isn't a great system either.
It is. It's the only system that works now, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, sure, but it'd be, regardless of that. So basically, the threat of World War III, the threat of nuclear war, the threat of this being a new Cold War have all been put forward as a result of this event. So it's a very significant event in geopolitics. It's very destabilizing. It's very uncertain what the results will be. And we haven't really grounded it yet in like one of the basic things, which is just that the Ukraine is divided between people who want to associate more closely economically and politically with the European Union and other ones who want to associate more economically and politically.
Northwest part, including Kiev, are desperate to go with the EU because they're
In terms of like trade
trade
partnerships.
they'd like to join the EU. They were hoping
Yeah, just be part of the EU, and Russia doesn't want to lose.
and the southeast part is more part of Russia. They were only thrown into Ukraine in 1954 by a drunken leader of Russia. It's just like they were still Russian. They were just like literally just like now you're not Russian. Just imagine if you were something like you're an American now, Canadians. Like I'm gonna like still
So they could just redraw the borders and like divide it into like North and South Ukraine, and then give part of it to Russia, and that might be one way it could end.
Although there's an unfortunate part. The eastern part, the Russian part, is actually the more profitable part of Ukraine by quite a bit. Like the country is really broke.
The Russian part?
Yeah, the Russian part is the much more. It has much more of the industry. So the west part with the United States doesn't want to lose the east part.
No, and there's tons of like oil and gas pipelines that come from Russia, so Russia could shut off their power or whatever. Yeah, and then it's not really an accurate analogy, but the whole thing was when Hitler initially like annexed or took over one of his like neighboring countries. They just decided to like let him do it, and that was always looked at as like a historical mistake because once he get away with it once, then he thinks he could do it again.
Yeah.
So there's no reason to say that Putin would be the same, but at the same point, if like I guess the fear of some of the Americans, rightly or wrongly, is that this is like a resurgence of like the imperial ambitions of basically the USSR might come back in the form of Russia like taking over other countries. Rightly or wrongly, that's sort of the argument or whatever.
People don't understand how basket case USSR or like Russia currently is, though. They're part of the G8, but they don't have the industry to be anything like the other countries. They basically rely on gas being over $100 a barrel, and their system is both extremely corrupt, as seen in the Sochi Olympics, where 25 billion out of the 50 billion was just stolen, and they're also like a very inefficient system that. Like they rely on selling things to function because they pay for quite a powerful military. So the fact is if they actually wanted to, other countries, if they worked out a system to get natural gas to Germany and to the EU, they could just stop trade with Russia, and then the oligarchs would kick Putin out in a minute and change policy.
And that's what's being discussed now is economic and trade sanctions as a response to try and cut off trade with Russia, but I've heard it said that you can't really cleanly do that because to cut off trade with Russia or impose trade sanctions on Russia would have a lot of negative effects for a lot of other countries other than Russia. So it'd be like a very like heavy-handed response because you could cause Russia to lose money, but so would like a whole bunch of other countries, and basically the global economy as a whole would suffer because it's not like some small country that you can like economically cut out. It's a huge country,
eighth largest economy in the world,
which all economies are interlinked. So trade sanctions, Russia is basically also putting a trade sanction against yourself. It's like you can't trade with Russia. It's like you're going to lose a huge trading partner.
Yeah.
So you're punishing Russia and yourself at the same time. It's part of the issue there.
Their natural gas keeps them safe from Germany. Like Germany does a lot of trade with Russia. Angela Merkel is on like quite good terms with Putin. Like he's like the only she's the only EU person he respects, and he's like a big macho, like usually doesn't listen to women type of guy. So like you can tell she's like a tough lady, and
she's like one of the most powerful people in the world.
She absolutely is, and there's been a very
leader of the EU,
palpable shift in the power balance with the power structures in the EU right now because this new German-Russo alliance that has sort of like emerged now is like something that's been
a new German-Russian alliance
strong.
has
It's not
emerged.
super new, but new.
They have a lot of bad history, but they seem to ignore it somehow.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Dan Carlin was talking about too, is that the worst thing that could happen for the States would be for them to so alienate and aggravate other nations.
EU, yeah.
Well, just other nations that two other superpowers join forces to basically collectively be stronger than the States. And what he was saying is, if you do enough like bad stuff, invading countries and make people mad, eventually China and Russia will be like, hey, this guy's a lunatic, let's get together and we'll be stronger than him. So similarly then Germany and Russia. Germany is not as big as China, but it's a pretty big, powerful country, and so is Russia. So if they form like an alliance that has this real significance for like the global balance of power.
That's kind of the neat thing is Angela Merkel, by being the leader of Germany, which is the most powerful funder of the EU, like basically the thing the glue keeping the whole thing together, is she keeps the rest of the EU in check regarding Russia too, because she can put a lot of like you won't have.
And Russia has no interest in being part of the EU.
No, they did before, but
Well, you were saying
oh no, so they want to be part of NATO. No, they haven't discussed the EU. That wouldn't be a thing.
Seems like it'd be too proud or something
And
to like subjugate themselves into a collective country.
Yeah, they don't consider themselves part of Europe. They've always kind of had that.
So I wonder if, because Putin is known for being a charismatic and self-obsessed leader in the sense that he really like publishes his image as like the strong, like they're saying in the Sochi Olympics, all the athletes like rooms had pictures of Putin bare-chested like fishing. It was in like all the athletes
Let this inspire
a
you.
strong muscular guy like I don't know if he is it. And he's just known for being kind of like I don't know what the word is, braggadocious, or I don't know what the word is, just like a very masculine, like strong figure.
Machoistic.
And I wonder if invading another country, even in this like half invasion way, isn't important for him just to assert his
certainly.
Like I wonder how much of it is just him personally trying to be a tough guy and show that he can be a tough guy and invade countries and use his military, and then not only the states can like use their military. And then also how much of it is Russia wanting to say that.
Russia is, like, they really like the Crimea take thing.
I'm sure they do, because if you're like a country
it's a national pride thing,
yeah,
right?
you would be proud. You're like, yeah, we're taking it back and our army's doing something, and like,
Yeah, no, it's certainly like a proud moment for the Russians. They're being able to assert themselves back on world stage in front of everybody.
But then the problem is if they enjoy that too much,
well, then you
keep doing.
Then you fall into it for real. Like, fortunately, the Germans and the Japanese and stuff during World War II, like the ideologies that really allow for like horrible massacres of people, communism too. It's just like an ideological battle allows you to be so much more evil than a battle for just wealth and land control. Like back during like the sort of medieval ages, all the European wars and stuff, they call it sort of soft warfare, because once it was ended, they'd have an agreement. The losing general would like give his sword or something to the winning one, and it's like a chunk of their zone would be cut off with some payment. It's like ideological battles allow for total extermination of other people. Like communism is like, all right, you're a capitalist. It's like you won't agree with our system of like financing, so it's like that's actually enough to kill you over. Obviously, Nazism's like you're a Jew or a cripple or like a Slav or whatever, so you deserve to die. Or like imperialist Japan's like our god is like an emperor god, and we're fairly xenophobic. So it's like clearly we have the right to murder you in whatever fashion we want. But like Russia's just a bunch of like they're just kind of like looking for money and land.
I mean, Russia has a long history of like fervent nationalism and
been a big player on the world stage.
They
for
said
a long
that
time.
Dan Carlin described them as xenophobic and paranoid for good reason.
I don't think xenophobic. They're paranoid, and they've had a sort of like a self-loathing, lack of confidence, sort of like they've been constantly trying to prove themselves to the West, to like France and England and Germany all their lives.
Yeah, it seems like they would really like to. They're kind of like Germany before both world wars, in the sense of being like a formally great and glorious empire that's like fallen into less respect, and so having that latent, fervor to like reignite the passion for Russia, or like as Germany, the fatherland or whatever, through rising up militarily to like reclaim your past glories of empire or whatever. I mean, that would be the concern.
And then I'll go with, like, I listen to a lot of Paul Craig Roberts. He's an economist. He was a assistant Treasury Secretary under the Reagan administration, but he's also become like the most adamant critic of the United States, both parties, for the last like 20 years. He like attacked Clinton, he attacked Bush, he attacked like Obama for all economically selling out the country. So I feel the guy has a lot of cred, and he's been following the Ukrainian thing quite a bit. And what he makes, it's very important to note that the United States has a long history of paying money to fund covert overthrows of governments. Like not only the stuff happened in South America when they did it, like actually funded military guys, but they pay NGOs to come in and change public opinion, incite riots. And the United States, Victoria Nuland, she was Assistant Secretary of State, I'd said in a recent interview that she was proud that they had spent $5 billion in Ukraine in the last, she said since 91. I don't know when the money was spent. Seems more likely to be more recently. But on democracy building. So that's $5 billion, which can buy a lot of democracy in a very poor Ukrainian country.
Coming from the States.
Yes, and there was some people putting forward the idea that neighboring countries people were being paid to come into Ukraine and protest. There's the idea that some people would get like $50 a day for be a protester and like $200 a day to be like a loud rioting like instigation protester.
Yeah.
And like it's hard to know how much of that is true.
Well, that's what Alex Jones said too.
Yeah.
I was listening to Alex Jones commentate on this issue too, and his main point was that the riots there are like U.S. instigated and like manufactured, and that it seemed to be an increasing pattern in the last couple of years with the Arab Spring and in Syria and other countries. These like huge protests. Some of them have shown to be like actually like movie sets basically that were like completely fake in that one case, I think. And can you take that outside?
And
so anyways, his point is just there's a lot of U.S. involvement here, and it's like a covert involvement basically. There's like the agent provocateurs and like, you know, the fake protesters, the instigated protest as a new geopolitical tool seems to be becoming more increasingly important.
And I'll throw out Victoria Nuland's thing here because there was a leaked quote between her, the Assistant Secretary of State, and...
This was from the hacked phone call?
Yeah, the hacked phone call, and Jeffrey Pyatt. And basically it's them deciding who needs to lead in Ukraine. So the idea is like this is supposed to be an independent revolution against your corrupt leaders, but here you have U.S. officials caught on tape deciding who it should be.
And that's why it's a new Cold War, because it's like proxies, like,
like
trying to like fight for a different country that's like...
I'll throw out some of the quote here by Pyatt. I have it written down. So Pyatt, yeah, I guess, in terms of him not going into the government, just let him stay out and do his political homework and stuff. I'm just thinking in terms of sort of the process moving ahead, we want to keep the moderate Democrats together. The problem is going to be, I'm going to butcher this name because I can't speak Ukrainian. The problem is going to be Tyanibok. Tyanibok is the... He was one of the opposition leaders. And his guys, I'm not sure that's part of what Yanukovych is calculating in all of this. And then Victoria Nuland comes in and says, I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience. He's what he needs is Klitsch and Tyanibok on the outside. He needs to be talking to them 4 times a week, you know. I think Klitsch going on, basically whatever. But for some reason, when people, end quote, but when they were talking before, the Yats is our guy became kind of a rallying call for the people who believe that this is a U.S. Takeover, because the new prime minister is Yats, Arsenij Yatsenyuk.
Immediately after the protests, the deposed leader was replaced by the guy who was heard to be handpicked on a phone call by like the American interest, basically.
Yes.
And so there's definitely the strong scent of U.S. involvement, and this could be a CIA-type operation, because one thing the CIA's function is king-making and king-breaking. Like, they go into a country as the CIA and completely covertly overthrow a government and replace it with a different government.
Pinochet was like the worst
Pinochet was an example, and that's part of the CIA's job description. They go into a nation and overthrow it, you know, read Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yeah. Find the rebels and you fund them to take over the country.
One way or another, you incite riots, you know, network with dissident groups, you fund certain sides and not other sides, you do this or you do that, and you replace a government and replace it with what you want. And it's possible that that's what's happened here.
They're also saying that's what's happening in Venezuela right now. They're saying some of the rebellion, like, the place really is a basket case. It may fall apart, it may just be nonsense, but the U.S. government has made their intentions towards Venezuela and their current, still, like, similar strain of Hugo Chavez style of government pretty clear. They're trying to get rid of these guys, and suddenly there's just massive riots all the time.
Yeah. Well, and it's, you know, par for the course. It's consistent that that this is within the U.S.'s capabilities and within their motives. They're talking about the protest groups as consisting of quite a number of different factions, including they talk about Nazis being there, neo-Nazis being part of it.
The right sector and Svoboda.
And that's on the part of the Russians, these neo-Nazis? Or on the part of the Ukrainians?
These are the Ukrainian ones. These guys...
like who are which nation?
So basically, Svoboda, they used to be called the Freedom... Or they were the Social Nationalist Party of Ukraine, because they literally copied the social nationalist idea of the Nazis. Mm-hmm. And their original flag for their group was a sideways swastika, like on a weird angle. Mm-hmm. So these guys are straight up neo-Nazis. They have immediate historical ties with the
But
Nazis.
they're associated with Ukrainian nationalism.
Yes, these are
Ukrainian
the Ukrainian
independence.
nationalists, the right sector and Svoboda. And this is a lot of the complaint people are putting against them. They're saying it's just like in Syria, it's like we're funding Al Qaeda to fight their government, and it's like in Ukraine we're funding Nazis to fight their government. It's
Right,
like,
because if you're supporting the Ukrainians, then part of it is these Ukrainian nationalist neo-Nazis.
and these guys, they were the disciplined part of the revolutionary fight. Like they really were just like the strong men, the ones who made the thing work. They kept
Nazis?
the Nazis. Like they were the straight up like well armed, well coordinated,
Yeah,
well
they're
disciplined.
Definitely, those kind of
Yeah.
people are always well cut out for like leading riots. That's what they like made
Yeah,
for.
and these guys they're famous for
And
like
so now they have disproportionate political influence because this riot and this like protest turned out to be so significant in actually replacing the government that now those like marginal but radical factions have a disproportionate amount of influence
In
because
the
they
new
like,
government.
in the new government because they were instrumental in overthrow of the old
And
government.
there's videos of them standing around with other members of the new government, the other opposition parties to the corrupt guy who got kicked out, and they're literally standing around with AKs, like sort of threatening the other opposition leaders, like basically kind of bullying to make sure that they get good positions.
Yeah. Well,
And,
and right now the Ukrainian government is arming militant groups and militia groups and forming like a self-defense force to supplement the Ukrainian army. I guess just to be more
Yeah,
equipped to like.
and
repel.
they're asking for money for weapons, for food and stuff. They're
But
just like,
Russia's army is so big that no matter
No,
what Ukraine
it's
does,
nonsense
it
to
would
try.
never be able to even slightly match it.
But here, I'll read you off the positions that the right groups now possess in the Ukrainian government, because it's a fairly big point about why this may be worse than what was replaced. They possess the right sector member. He was a neo-Nazi commander who once said, "Our revival begins with Maidan," is now second in command of the National Defense and Security Council. One of the co-founders of the fascist Social National Party, would run. In 2012, he changed to the Fatherland ticket, but he was one of the founders of the original Social National Party. He is the top commander of the National Defense and Security Council. One of the members is now Minister of Defense. One of them is one of the three prime ministers. One of them is the Attorney General. One of them is the Education Ministry Leader, Ecology Ministry Leader, and Agriculture Ministry Leader.
So one of the effects of this event has been the rise of National Socialists into more prominent political positions in the Ukraine.
In 2012, the Svoboda Party gained about 10% of the popular vote from their original 0.36, and they got like 36 out of the 450 seats. So, like, this has been building for a little bit. This came even before the actual thing happened. But like, basically, right wing, like you could say, neo-Nazis have become a big part of the Ukrainian government.
So based on what you understand about the situation, what do you predict is going to happen in the immediate future and the long term? Just what kind of predictions can you make about where this is going and what the implications are?
All right, here, but before I tell this, I'll just tell one more contextual thing. Because Putin's reason for bringing the people into Crimea and like sort of why people are saying he might even try and take more of the Russian-controlled parts of the Ukraine is to defend Russians. Is like that's what he's saying. Is like whether or not that's just an excuse or whether or not he actually cares about the Russians, it's moot. But and he's saying that because in 2010, Svoboda's official forum posting, official like website posted this statement saying to create a truly Ukrainian Ukraine in the cities of the East and South, so the Russian ones. We will need to cancel parliamentarianism, so get rid of parliament, ban all political parties, nationalize the entire industry, all media, prohibit the importation of any literature to Ukraine from Russia, completely replace the leaders of the civil service, education management, military, and physically liquidate all Russian-speaking intellectuals. That's a really intense...
Physically liquidate.
I didn't notice that part.
Does that mean kill them?
Yeah.
Yeah, all Russian-speaking intellectuals and all Ukrainophobes, fast, without a trial shot. Registering Ukrainophobes can be done here by any member, so they'll allow them in. Execute all members of the anti-Ukrainian political parties.
So he's talking about killing people.
So yeah, so this is a party that now has 10% of the vote and members in charge of Ukraine's defense. So basically the military is run by people who just said that. Nazis who really, really hate communists, Russians, and Jews. really Jews. I guess there was actually some people in Israel, some of the head rabbi people were saying that the Jews should get out of the country.
So what you're hearing on Fox News is basically just that, like, Russia is invading countries and committing war crimes, and this is unacceptable, and Russia's being bad, and Russia should stop this, and Russia is breaking international law. But another way to look at it is Russia is trying to protect Russians from Nazis who have now taken over the country, who are backed by the United States.
There is such a
Yes.
large Jewish Russian population.
Yes.
So basically, this is a Nazi-American takeover of the Ukraine.
America.
Yes.
Yeah, because if you've been listening, this has all been like
Yeah.
orchestrated and backed by the United
Right.
States, or at least some people are
And
arguing
it may
that.
wind up as a takeover of the whole Ukraine either way. Like the United States has been trying to bring them into their fold, which generally means domination. Like if you look at Greece, when they were a basket case, they got screwed by their bailout deal. Like they will never recover. All of their national things were sold off for nothing. Like they've been reduced to a third world country indefinitely by debt.
And they also had a huge rise of Nazism in Greece.
And they also had the same thing. And they're saying right now, the first thing the IMF, a U.S. Controlled institution, they immediately cut Ukrainians' pensions in half, down from $180 a month to $60 a month, and they're loaning them some money and forcing them to accept massive austerity measures
in Ukraine.
in Ukraine.
Well, no, so it's a banker takeover.
That's certainly one argument.
That's what the bankers always do. That's what they did in
Yes.
Ukraine. The
Now,
bankers create these poverty conditions, then create austerity, and then use that to just gobble up the country and somehow.
And
Because that's what I think Alex Jones was saying. Somehow, George Soros is behind
yeah,
this.
Soros is weirdly enough really apparently involved in the funding of the revolution against the old president. And it's worth
And
remembering.
he's a banker guy.
He's a massive investor, yeah. Usually they say he's a liberal considered investor. They always, the people on the right in the
Alex
United
Jones
States.
just hates
Yes,
him
that would make a
passionately.
lot of sense.
Alex Jones always just George Soros,
Yeah.
bloated maggot, just going on.
Yeah, and it's certainly there's a lot to that. And he's been a big part of this overthrow. Wait one sec, I was going somewhere with that.
Well, I was asking you, what do you got to say now? What do you think are the future prospects for this? What are the implications? What's going to happen? Where is this leading? What
I
is it?
think what's going to happen is I don't think Europe is going to do very much. The UK is not going to go in on any sanctions. The UK actually accepts a huge amount of Russian money all the time. They're going to throw on some very pretend sanctions that really don't have to do with the main economy. They'll freeze some travel visas. They may freeze the assets of some rich Russians, some oligarchs who might be involved in their foreign policy. But for the most part, I think it's pretty much agreed that Russia took Crimea and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And
So they're going to keep it.
they're going to keep it, and the fact that nobody's dying, there's not even a lot of, they'll be talked about for a little while, but if this doesn't expand in any way, which I don't think it can or will,
So you don't think this is going to really get bigger or worse?
no, we can't afford it to, man. Russia is, they're just too well armed with weapons.
But what if they decide to invade more countries? You
Oh.
don't think that's going to happen?
Well, I think they're I think they know that the United States, some of the leaders are not afraid of a nuclear war. Not,
You think Russia wouldn't invade more countries?
no, not
They
particularly.
just felt they could get away with this one in
They-
particular because
they-
they had a strong claim to it.
They may take the other the Ukraine provinces, but I'd even be surprised about that. I think they just didn't want to lose
So
the
do you
base.
think that the world as at large hasn't really changed that much for the average Canadian or American? There's nothing really going to be different because some little part of the Ukraine that nobody knew existed has now changed hands. And that's it, basically. It's not going to lead to nuclear war or Cold War or any
What's-
other major thing.
The only thing I could see happening that'd be really bad is if the U.S. leans on the EU to implant a lot of really painful sanctions. And that's, if you know, the history of World War II, why it happened is after the Treaty of Versailles, is basically once you,
If you fuck a country over
and
too
all
much,
they have is weapons.
then they're going to fight back.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that needs to be said?
There was one interesting quote here. This is an interesting one because basically what happened with the revolution to push it over the edge. Because it's worth remembering that Viktor Yanukovych, the Ukrainian leader, was democratically elected in what was considered a fair election by outside observers. So technically he was the government. It's an interesting.
Oh yeah, that's what they point out. This was a coup. It's not being called a
Yeah,
coup, but this was a
because
coup.
it's worth remembering that the Ukraine Parliament voted him out, though they impeached him, and then he escaped out of the country. But it's why was there an armed revolution that made him run out of the country and vote him out?
Yeah, they're saying this was a U.S. government-backed coup, but that's not being said in the media. They're choosing not to call it a coup, but it was, because it's like a sudden, like, orchestrated power shift.
Yeah.
Basically.
And basically, he was elected, then he was kicked out. And but the thing is, he had agreed to elections in 2015. They were going to push them forward to see if they wanted to vote him out. So this is going to be kind of like an Egypt thing, where you suddenly have a precedent to kick out the government militarily, because like Egypt, they elected was it al-Sisi, they elected Mohammed Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood leader, and then it turns out it's like the first thing they did would be like a really corrupt, shitty government, try and lean on the rights of non-Muslim groups and like not their Muslim group, and basically what happens, they like the al-Sisi and the opposition and the military just kicked them out, took over. But suddenly you have a precedent in the country for overthrowing democracy because the wrong people got elected.
It destabilizes democracy in that country.
Yeah, and they're
which
wondering.
In this case, is just the Ukraine. So this is the thing: is nobody actually really cares about the Ukraine, and I mean, obviously everybody does, but not Canadians or Americans. They don't really have a passionate, vested interest in the Ukraine. That's just an obvious fact. Some people have Ukrainian ancestry, maybe even quite a few in some places. But this isn't an issue that really hits close to home for most.
We got a lot of Ukrainians here where we live. It means a lot to them.
Sure, but nevertheless, in the big scale of things, Crimea isn't something that's like poses a major existential.
Geopolitically, I don't think we're gonna get nuked over Crimea.
Well, it's good to know. Anything else you want people to know about this issue?
I was going to say, one interesting part, I don't know how many people caught this, it was another leaked phone call, but basically, once they had decided they were going to have 2015 elections, it seemed like things were going to calm down, but then in the Independence Square, they wound up with one big, kind like a massacre of protesters that threw it over the edge, and then after that it was to take over the government, and they threw out the old government.
I saw the pictures of Independence Square before and after, and it was like this beautiful place, and it was just like a war zone after. So
I'll see if we can find a picture of it.
No, it's okay.
Alright, I'll say one part though. This was a leak from the Estonian Foreign Minister Urmas Paet and European Union Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton. And basically it's them talking, and Paet says, Olga can say that it is the same handwriting, the same type of bullets, and it's really disturbing that now the new coalition, that they don't want to investigate exactly what happened. So he's saying that they don't want to find out what happened on that massacre day. There seems to be a reluctance.
How many people died?
They said 80.
80 protesters?
And I think some were cops also shot.
Because the government at the time was firing on its citizens.
Yes.
With live ammunition.
And that's Dan Carlin's.
And that government is now gone.
And that was Victor, Yanukovych
right.
was gone.
So that's got to be remembered. The government that is now gone fired on its own citizens with live ammunition. Yes. And Dan Carlin said any government that does that has completely lost its legitimacy.
You've lost all credibility.
So whatever else we might say about neo-Nazis taking over or about it being backed by the Americans, at the end of the day, from Dan Carlin's logic, what happened is a nation overthrew its government that was completely delegitimate because it fired on its own people and then replaced it, which from that point of view is a good thing.
This is an interesting statement here. Paet is basically suggesting that the sniping was not done by Yanukovych's government.
Well, I've heard there was Blackwater mercenaries there.
A U.S. mercenary group?
Yeah, Blackwater it's now called Academy. They changed the name twice. First it was Blackwater, then they changed it to something like XU or something like that, just like Zoo or something, and now it's Academy apparently. But I can't confirm that whatsoever. But I've heard that there was Blackwater involvement.
That seems to be what these people are suggesting. These basically foreign diplomats on a call that wound up getting stolen and leaked from them are saying that it seems like somebody was there murdering people, including police officers and protesters.
Well, anytime there's some big geopolitical craziness like this, it draws groups from all over the world that it gets like a complicated mix. Like the U.S. government will always tell you there's Islamist groups that go all over the world, basically going to where conflict is to that's what they say. A lot of it's, they always say it's Al-Qaeda affiliation and this or that, which to some extent may or may not be true. But and then there's also the neo-Nazi groups and the nationalist groups. But there's also always the idea of agent provocateurs or U.S. agents or mercenaries who might be involved for some reason. I don't know. I mean, there's always layers to it. And it's never clear what's really going on. But
it's going to be an interesting thing. Hopefully Ukraine can just split down the middle, because it just seems inevitable, and that it should happen. It's because one thing they're saying about Crimea is right now they're having a vote for independence coming up in the next this Sunday, I think.
Independence from the Ukraine?
Independence from Ukraine, yeah. And basically they're saying since Russia like is in charge of the country militarily right now, it's like there's no way this can be fair, and they're right. Like there's no way that can be fair. But the idea is that like Crimea might quite possibly vote to leave independently.
Yeah, leave. Well, it wouldn't be a vote for independence.
And
it would be a vote to join the Russia. Basically.
No. They're saying they were giving them the option to become their own independent state. Like Crimea was sort of independent from Ukraine, but they were still technically part of them. They were like they had autonomy.
Join Russia because they would need all that support. Like,
but the option was either to join Russia or to leave. Those are the two the questions on the referendum. Is like, do you support joining Crimea with the Russian Federation as a subject of Russian Federation? And question 2, do you support restoration of 1992 Crimean Constitution and Crimea's status as a part of Ukraine? Like they suggest that'd be part of Ukraine, but everyone kind of acknowledges that they would quickly leave and then likely join with Russia or stay as an independent, sort of like.
It'd be trippy to participate in a vote that had that much significance. You know, like we've never had an opportunity to vote on an issue like, do you want where you live to like secede or join this group or join that group? It's interesting. You know, the idea you vote for one or the other party, and it never makes that much of a difference. But that would make a huge difference.
Pick up your toys and go home.
Yeah.
But the one thing they're talking about now, because like the United States and stuff, they're saying they're not going to recognize this vote. Canada, John Baird, our defense minister, has been talking about, or our Minister of Foreign Affairs has been talking about it, and basically what they're saying though is that they're not allowed to unilaterally secede from Ukraine, because Ukraine and their constitution say they get to be part of any vote for anyone to leave. But then there's a precedent set in 2008 when Kosovo voted to leave from Serbia, and the United States immediately recognized that when they did. So it's like, all right, well, like 6 years ago, you recognized unilateral independence, and now you're not going to. So there's kind of a precedent for them, for Crimea to, diplomatically, if they're not holding them at gunpoint, separate and join Russia. But yeah,
it's very interesting, and we'll keep following it. There's round-the-clock news coverage on this issue right now on the major news stations.
It's the biggest thing in a while, because even if I don't think it threatens us all with nuclear annihilation. Like they haven't successfully boxed Russia in, so we're still guided by the rules of mutually assured destruction. But it's certainly the biggest thing.
Well, and there's one thing that Dan Carlin said. He said mutually assured destruction assumes the rationality of human actors, but there's good reasons to question the rationality of human actors.
That's true.
We don't know. People may or may not act from rational self-interest. They might act from other motivations. That said, it's good to know. I don't think this will lead to nuclear war, and thank you very much for elaborating so much on the issue, helping us all to understand what's going on.
My pleasure, Blue Mantis.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the Prime Divide. I'm the Blue Mantis.
I'm the Red Dwarf.
It's all about love.
About the love. Bye, ladies and gentlemen.
I am the millipede, I am amazing.